Otis Redding was once hailed as the voice of America's soul, and all it took was a single note from him to bring listeners to tears. At a time when black people couldn't even rent a motel room, Otis's music became a shelter both warm and thunderous. But few people knew that behind that voice lay a string of secrets that were never brought to light, a violent shooting at Club 15 that he witnessed firsthand, the intense rivalries within the soul music scene, and a mysterious silence even when his career was at its peak. Could it be that the very secrets Otis Redding kept hidden were what led him to board that doomed flight in 1967, taking those secrets with him forever to the bottom of Lake Wisconsin at the age of 26? And if those truths had been spoken, would his fate have changed? That's why we need to tell this story in today's video. Otis Redding once said, "I know I was born to sing, even if it costs me everything." And perhaps that cost had already been decided long ago, when he was just a 4-year-old black boy living in the poor housing project of Tyndall Heights in Macon, Georgia. A place where black children weren't allowed in movie theaters, weren't allowed to cross the invisible borders of white neighborhoods, and even their dreams had to be hidden in silence. Otis was born on September 9, 1941, in Dawson, Georgia, the eldest of 6 children of Otis Sr. and Fanny Redding. His father was both a preacher and a sharecropper, working all day under the sun and wind, yet never earning enough to feed the family. His mother worked as a domestic helper, quietly shouldering the burden of lack in a cramped, damp home. The entire family was devoted to the Baptist church, the only place where Otis was allowed to raise his voice without judgment. It was during weekend services that young Otis first sang gospel in the choir. His voice didn't just carry, it carried sorrow, deep and undeniable, and the whole community took notice. At age 7, Otis was already playing drums, and not long after. He began mimicking Little Richard's voice through an old radio his father had brought home from church. He didn't just listen, he memorized every syllable, every broken note, every breath of the black artists struggling to find their place in white American culture. But as his talent began to bloom, his own family became the first obstacle he had to fight. His father disapproved of Otis pursuing rock and roll, believing that kind of music would lead his son down a sinful path. The arguments were constant, often lasting deep into the night. Otis would sneak out in his father's car to perform late-night gigs, and only after earning his first taste of success did he dare use that money to buy his father a new Ford, an apology that was never fully accepted. Still, early successes couldn't cover the weight of his early failures before becoming known. Otis took on any job he could find while digging, loading freight, working in a hospital, but no job kept him for more than a week. For Otis, music was the only thing that made him feel truly alive. In Macon, he signed up for every talent contest he could find and kept winning, to the point where one organizer banned him from entering again, saying, "You're too good." Through envious eyes and thinly veiled prejudice, Otis learned something early: black talent was only welcomed when it served a white audience, and only if it obeyed. Otis stood at 6'4", a towering presence wherever he went. Friends described him as flashy, street smart, and always radiating a magnetic energy. Yet deep inside, he remained that self-conscious kid, the one who once stood in front of a mirror practicing how to smile like white folks. The one who once asked his mother, "Why can't I have hair like them?" In 1958, just after turning 17, Otis Redding officially dropped out of school to hustle for a living. Poverty closed in like a heavy fog, not only cutting off his education, but forcing him to do whatever it took to support his family. From 1959 to 1960, Otis's life became a cycle of day labor and nighttime gigs at small clubs or makeshift studios, singing with local bands. One night, by chance, he filled in for a member of the Pine Toppers. No one expected that his fierce voice would silence the entire venue. the band's guitarist, Johnny Jenkins, immediately invited Otis to join and took him on the road, performing across Georgia from agricultural fairs to rundown bars for poor black audiences. It was during those touring days that Otis met Zelma, a smart, strong young woman who would later become his wife. They married in 1961 when Otis had just turned 20. There was no wedding dress, no party, just a vow before God in a small church in Macon. Married life started as a string of hardships. Otis had no recording contract, income was unstable, and 3 children arrived one after another while their home had only a single bedroom. Yet it was Zelma who pushed Otis not to give up. She often recalled, "Every time I heard him sing in the kitchen, I knew music was the only thing that could lift us out of poverty." Still, Otis's music career was far from easy. In 1961, he was invited to Los Angeles for a demo session with an independent label. It was his first time in a professional studio. But the recording failed. They said his voice was too rough, not commercial, gave him a few dollars, and told him to pay his own way back to Georgia. On the return bus ride, Otis sat for 48 hours without sleeping, staring into the night through the window without saying a word. When he arrived home in Macon, he told his wife only one thing: "I'm going back there and they're going to have to say my name." And then destiny began with an opportunity that seemed unrelated. In October 1962, Otis drove Johnny Jenkins to Stax Records in Memphis for a recording session. Otis was just the driver. Jenkins finished early and left, leaving a few minutes of studio time unused. Otis asked for permission to try singing a song he had written, "These Arms of Mine." These arms of mine. When his voice filled the room, the entire studio stopped. Musician Al Jackson Jr. recalled, "I got goosebumps." No one in the room said a word after he finished the last line. Right then and there, Stax agreed to sign Otis. An unknown driver suddenly became a singer for one of the South's largest black-owned record labels. Success came slowly at first. These Arms of Mine wasn't an instant hit, but it played frequently on Southern radio stations, especially in cities with large black communities. In 1963, Otis began receiving invitations to tour nationally. Small venues gradually gave way to large theaters, where he stood before thousands of applauding fans. However, along with the spotlight came a simmering darkness. Otis Redding was a successful black man in a music industry dominated by white people and divided by internal tensions among black artists. He was often denied hotel accommodations because of his skin color, forcing him to sleep in his car or backstage during a performance in Alabama while traveling with a band that included white members. He was nearly arrested by police for unlawful interracial association. Otis once recounted being forced to leave his car in the dead of night because the hotel where the group stopped wouldn't allow black guests. He slept in the car in 37-degree weather, wrapped only in a thin blanket, and took the stage the next morning with a radiant smile. Not because he wasn't angry, but because he knew that if he protested, his career would end immediately. Many say it was this patience that helped Otis endure, but some believe that deep within him, a persistent pain had begun to form a suppressed anger that simmered for years, only to be understood later when he faced the violence at Club 15 or the fateful plane crash. People began to realize that Otis Redding was not just the voice of hope. He was also a symbol of what had never been spoken. The explosion of his career came in 1964 when Otis Redding wrote the song "I've Been Loving You Too Long" with Jerry Butler, a track considered the soul of soul music at the time. When the song flooded the radio waves, audiences exclaimed, "This man sings as if he's cutting his heart out and placing it into the song." Otis's style wasn't ornate, but full of explosive energy. It was a raw and original emotion that made listeners feel as if they could see into his heart. Otis admitted, "I sing with my heart, not just with my voice." That statement later became his life philosophy. whether on stage or during quiet studio sessions. He never set aside his emotions. Instead, Otis poured them into each song, turning the stage into a place of confession. In 1967, Otis officially conquered Europe during a legendary tour. In England, he was warmly welcomed. The Beatles sent a limousine to pick him up, and invitations to dine with Tom Jones and Mick Jagger awaited him. In an interview after the trip, Otis was astonished back home. "I've never been treated like this." The nights performing with Sam and Dave, Carla Thomas, and Eddie Floyd were truly historic. But among them all, Otis was the one who made audiences cry in their seats. His voice struck directly at the heart, and that was entirely different from those who sang merely to entertain. Despite his fame in the black community and in Europe, Otis was never invited to perform on major American television shows. Even though he sold thousands of tickets in every country, he was still seen as a gospel singer only for minority communities. Many believed that Otis had crossed a line by wanting to collaborate with white rock artists, something that conservative producers at the time vehemently opposed. One of the most defining moments in Otis Redding's career was the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, on the star-studded night of the hippie era. Otis appeared in a sharp three-piece suit, contrasting with the casual styles of Hendrix or Joplin. When he sang "Shake," the audience erupted from their seats, and leading newspapers simultaneously named Otis as the true soul of Monterey night. But fame sometimes also means sacrifice. The dense tour schedules, late-night flights, and the artist who always chose the stage over family took their toll. Otis's vocal cords were damaged from overuse. Doctors warned that if he continued, he could permanently lose his voice. Otis had to undergo surgery, rest his voice for 6 weeks. But as soon as he recovered, he returned to the stage. In an interview with Esquire magazine in 1966, Otis said, "I don't just have to sing well, I have to fight to be allowed to sing as a human being." That statement is enough to understand. Behind that sweet voice was a soul torn apart by discrimination, conflict, and pain. And perhaps those pains pushed Otis Redding toward the series of tragedies that followed. The first tragedy came in the summer of 1967 when Otis Redding was at the peak of his fame with transatlantic tours and recognition from even those who had turned their backs on black music. An event occurred in his hometown of Macon that left a fracture in his soul for the rest of his life. Club 15, a famous music venue for black artists, became the stage for a horrifying incident that few dared to mention. That night, the atmosphere was electric after Joe Tex's performance. The audience hadn't yet dispersed when James Brown suddenly appeared with 2 large hunting rifles in hand. No one understood why he was so furious. But rumors quickly spread that Brown was angry because Joe Tex had mimicked his performance style and worn the red cape that once belonged to him. Without a word, Brown pointed the guns and pulled the trigger. Gunshots rang out. Screams erupted from all directions. He didn't just aim at Joe Tex, but began shooting wildly toward the stage and backstage area. In that chaotic moment, Otis Redding and his band members couldn't escape, only managing to dive behind the upright piano on the left wing. A bullet lodged into the wall less than a hand's breadth from Otis. 6 people were injured. A witness later recounted that Otis had pulled a female singer who had been shot into a hidden corner, using his shirt to stop the bleeding. But just a few minutes later, James Brown's team arrived, not to take him away, but to distribute money. Each person was given $100 with a cold message. No one saw anything. Johnny Jenkins, Otis's guitarist, later revealed in a rare interview 7 people were shot. But then everything disappeared as if it never happened. James Brown left Macon that very night. No charges were filed. Otis Redding, once hailed as the voice of the soul, also remained silent and to the public. That night was just another regular performance. Why didn't Otis speak out? Some say he was afraid because Brown had connections with powerful forces in the entertainment industry, people who could turn a shooting into a back-page news item. Others believe that Otis wanted to protect the image of the black artist community, not wanting the public to see internal divisions and violence. But many whispers suggested that he had received a settlement in exchange for his silence. This event left a deep psychological wound. Friends said that Otis became more cautious with colleagues. He no longer felt comfortable gathering after performances and always declined parties attended by influential figures in the music industry. Previously, he had said, "I love music because it doesn't lie." But after Club 15, people began to see him silent longer in the studio, singing more slowly on stage, and often looking around as if wary of something unnamed. The question arises, was the Club 15 incident just a spontaneous accident, or was it a manifestation of a more complex network, where power, jealousy, and money always intertwined? A backstage source once hinted that Club 15 was just the tip of the iceberg, that the underground rivalries in the black entertainment industry in the late 1960s were no less ruthless than any mafia world, and that perhaps Otis Redding's intention to collaborate with white artists, considered betrayal at the time, had put him in the crosshairs. Perhaps Otis foresaw something. Maybe that's why he began writing "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay," the saddest song of his career, and also the last he recorded. In that song, he no longer sang about love, but about withdrawal, about sitting quietly watching life drift by, like someone who had lost faith in what he once fought for. No one knows for sure what happened after the Club 15 incident, but everyone felt that after that night, Otis Redding was no longer himself, and perhaps that darkness followed him onto the fateful plane a few months later. In November 1967, as winter began to cast its cold mist over the American South, Otis Redding had no intention of resting. Within a week at Stax Records' studio in Memphis, he recorded up to 26 new songs. His voice, already recognized as one of the most emotional in soul music, now became even more intense, somewhat seasoned, sometimes strangely subdued. Sound engineers recalled that Otis seemed to be racing against time. He worked day and night, slept little, took few breaks, and always carried a notebook filled with ideas, lyrics, and unfinished melodies. Among them stood out a sad and tranquil song, "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay." With the Bar-Kays, the young band Otis mentored and considered family. He was not just a star, but also a teacher, a big brother. Those 20-something boys always saw Otis as an inspiration. They followed him everywhere, from small halls in the South to packed European stages. Otis not only shared fame with them, but also shared money, accommodation, even stage outfits. He cherished them as if they were his own family. In early December 1967, Otis and the Bar-Kays went to Cleveland for a performance. That night, the audience stood and applauded non-stop when he began to sing. Many recalled that Otis seemed to be on fire on stage, singing as if there were no tomorrow. No one knew that was the last time he would appear before the public. The plane took off and lost contact just minutes before landing. No distress signal, no emergency radio call. Then, a sharp sound echoed across the icy lake. The plane crashed into Lake Monona, shattering upon impact. Otis Redding, along with 4 members of the Bar-Kays, the pilot, and an assistant, died instantly. The sole survivor was Ben Cawley, the band's trumpet player. He later recounted waking up in the freezing water, drifting amidst the wreckage. James Alexander, the only Bar-Kays bassist not on the flight, was tasked with the harrowing duty of identifying his friends' bodies. He later said that memory never left him. Nothing could prepare him for seeing his brothers' once music, youth, and hope now reduced to cold, lifeless forms. What raised suspicions wasn't just the magnitude of the accident, but a series of anomalies. First, the weather. Though poor, wasn't considered life-threatening for an experienced pilot. Moreover, no distress signal was sent. The plane's black box later revealed no clear technical faults. The aircraft didn't explode. It simply fell. Various theories emerged. Some suggested the navigation system had been tampered with or jammed, causing the pilot to lose orientation. Others questioned Otis's relationships within the music industry. He had intended to release a series of songs supporting the civil rights movement, which was believed to potentially shake an industry still controlled by white executives. Some speculated that his interactions and desire to collaborate with white artists like Janis Joplin, Mick Jagger, or even some Southern rockers were not welcomed by record label owners. All these factors led many to believe the crash was more than a cruel coincidence. Some said Otis once confided to a close friend, "Sometimes I feel like I'm singing between two lines of fire, one from the crowd, one from the powers that be." What made his death even more eerie was that he had recorded "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay" just 3 days before the accident. It was his first song without a strong drum beat, without burning aspirations, ending only with a gentle whistle and lyrics that felt like a farewell. "This loneliness won't leave me alone." Many believe he sensed something was coming, as if he were sitting on a dock of destiny, watching everything pass by, unable to hold on. The music community was stunned. Radio stations replayed his old recordings, and just weeks later, "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay" became the first posthumous #1 single on the Billboard chart. It sold over 4 million copies, but no one could celebrate fully, because Otis was no longer there to hear the applause. To fans, his death felt like a theft, stealing the voice of a generation, a blossoming soul, a black man who dared to dream of a fairer America. To the music industry, it was a silent warning. If you cross the line, you may never return. Otis Redding passed away at 26. No scandals, no extravagance, no compromises. He left behind a wife, 3 children, and a legacy that still sends chills whenever that melody plays, sitting quietly on the dock, letting time pass meaninglessly. And from the depths of Wisconsin's icy waters, people still wonder, what did Otis Redding see before the plane touched the lake? And who, or what, truly silenced the voice of an unyielding soul? Otis Redding didn't just leave behind vibrant recordings, he left a void that decades later remains unfilled. When he died, the loss wasn't just a unique voice, but an unfinished future. In that future, Otis could have become a global icon, transcending racial and musical boundaries. His influence extended far beyond his era, with a rich, fiery, and emotional voice. Otis didn't just sing soul music, he lived each song. Tracks like "Try a Little Tenderness" or "I've Been Loving You Too Long" became templates for generations of artists, from Marvin Gaye to Al Green, from Donny Hathaway to Anthony Hamilton. But the pinnacle of that influence was "Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay," the first soul pop fusion song to reach #1 on Billboard after his death. It proved Otis was ready to break boundaries, paving the way for black artists to reach a broader mainstream audience. However, his sudden departure also opened another chapter, a chapter where his legacy was commercialized and tugged between love and profit. After his death, Stax Records continuously released unfinished recordings, even editing his vocals to suit contemporary markets. This made many fans feel he was treated more like a commodity than an artist deserving reverence. Controversy intensified when the demo, "You Left the Water Running," was illegally released in 1976. Otis's family sued Stone Records, and it wasn't until 1987, after music critic Dave Marsh intervened and acquired the rights, that the song was legally released. Though somewhat protected, the lawsuit highlighted the industry's gaps and ambitions. where even the deceased couldn't rest in peace. Furthermore, the album Otis Blue, one of his classic works, contained an unsolved mystery. The cover featured a blonde woman with sorrowful eyes, but no one could identify her. Photographer Peter Sahula admitted he couldn't recall the model from the shoot. Some speculated she might be singer Nico or Dagmar Drager, but no evidence confirmed this. This added a layer of mist to the album, much like Otis's own destiny. Another story further clouded the serene memory of Otis. Journalist Joe Esterhaas once recounted that, after a performance, Otis had inadvertently used a racially charged term to describe a white audience member. No one could verify this. No witnesses came forward, but the story immediately sparked debate. Some defended him, attributing it to the racial pressures of the civil rights era. Others criticized, saying it tarnished the noble image the public had of him, regardless of the truth. The incident showed that Otis wasn't a saint. He was human, bearing all the contradictions and scars of his time. The person who continued to keep Otis's legacy alive was his widow, Zelma Redding. She became the sole manager of her husband's estate, establishing the Otis Redding Foundation to support youth education and music. But even in this journey, Zelma faced numerous challenges. At times, she was doubted by Otis's own family members over profit distribution. At other times, the press questioned her reasons for releasing unfinished music. But through it all, she simply said Otis couldn't express his final wishes. "I have to do the rest with all my love and responsibility." Had the 1967 accident not occurred, Otis might have become another Stevie Wonder. He could have collaborated with white artists on albums breaking racial barriers. He might have sung at campaign rallies or even ventured into film like many contemporaries. But fate ended all those possibilities at 26 an age when, for many, life is just beginning. Zelma Redding once tearfully said during a memorial Otis was ready for a new chapter. But fate stole that opportunity. And in that regret, people realize that it's the things he never got to do that make him immortal. It's like an unfinished song, echoing endlessly in the minds of millions of fans. No matter how many years pass, whenever the first notes of Dock of the Bay play, people glimpse Otis, a young black man with dreamy eyes, who once sang amidst the storm of history. So, what do you think? Was Otis Redding a victim of a harsh system? Or did he simply know too many secrets? Share your perspective on this legend's life in the comments below. And continue exploring untold stories of soul artists from the golden decade. A place where not only music resounds, but also harbors blood, tears, and secrets that may never be unraveled.